Hey everyone, welcome to the Story Church podcast. My name is Sarah, and I'm the Children's Ministry Director here at The Story in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Our mission here is simple, to see 0 people left unchanged by Jesus. So whether you've been following Jesus your whole life, or your journey has just begun, we hope that this message will help you draw near to the person of Jesus, be challenged and encouraged by his word, and be moved to action. We hope these next few moments are a blessing to you and equip you to see who God really is and who you are in him.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's great to be back with you here at Story. And if I'm a new face to you, my name is Brian, and I get the privilege of being serving as the senior pastor for the Zero Collective Network. So Story is part of this network family of churches that we get to support and do life together. And really, my role is I am your pastor's pastor. And that is a great joy for me. And in fact, today, Pastor Kyle and Courtney and their family are having a much-deserved week off. And so I'm excited because we're continuing in on this series that Pastor Kyle started last week. And in fact, at all of our Zero Collective churches, we are looking this entire month at a passage of Scripture in Micah chapter 6. That's where we're really going to be for this entire month of February. And we're talking about what does it mean to live the good life as God defines it. And oftentimes the way God defines what it means to live a good life causes us to be kind of a rebel in our world. And so Micah chapter 6, specifically verse 8, is what we're talking about this entire month. And so I'd love to just revisit that verse. We looked at it last week as well. But Micah 6:8 says, "Know, O people, the Lord has told you what is good," or what is the good life, is a way you could translate that. And this is what he requires of you, to do what is right. And some translations you may have say to do justice or to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. So that's what we're talking about this whole month. And today specifically, what we're going to talk about is what does it mean, if you didn't already pick up on it, to do justice. That's what we're talking about. What does it mean to act justly or to do justice? So I want to introduce you to someone. Go ahead, if you guys will, to that picture. This is Joan Ginther. And this is a picture of Joan Ginther in 1993 when she won the lottery while she was living in a small Texas town. And so what she raked in was $5.4 million when she won the lottery. And suddenly, overnight, her life was transformed. She suddenly no longer had the burdens of, a house payment, car payments, all the other debts in life that we accumulate. And that was pretty awesome. But believe it or not, 13 years later, in 2006, Joan Ginther, this woman, won the lottery again, a second time. And this time it was for $2 million to add to her 5.4 that she already had won 13 years before. I mean, what are the chances of that, right? That lightning would strike the same person, basically, in life like that. But unbelievably, Joan wasn't done. 2 years later, in 2008, she bought another scratch-off lotto ticket, and she won a third time, this time for $3 million. Unreal, but actually she wasn't done. This is true. This is a true story. You can actually go look this up. In 2010, 2 years later, Joan Ginther won a fourth lottery, and this time for the largest amount of money that she had won. She won a $10 million sum from this lottery, bringing her total winnings all 4 times to $20.4 million. Now, people who are good at math, which is not me, have actually done the math on this and have ran the odds. You know what the odds are for one person winning the lottery like that 4 times in one lifetime? The odds, I am told, is 1 in 18 septillions. Now, don't ask me what that is. I don't know what a septillion is, but it's a lot. It's a big number. It's just crazy. Have you ever looked at somebody else or somebody else's life around you, and you just asked the question, why is life so unjust? Have you ever wondered that? Like, why is life so unfair? Why in the world do some people have so much? We're talking today about justice, and as I've been preparing for this message and this whole month, I've been really convicted about something. And what I feel like the Lord's really convicted me about is that actually I think about justice all the time. At least weekly, I think about justice. I bet you do too. But whenever I think about justice, I think about it through my own lens. In other words, whenever I think about justice, I don't think about how I should be acting or treating other people. I think about how other people should be acting and treating me. I think about, man, is life, being fair to me? I'm obsessed with, any kind of injustice, any kind of way in which I feel like I've been slighted or circumstances haven't been fair to me or family members haven't been fair or whatever it is. I'm obsessed with that. And what I've found is that usually when I'm focusing on how unfair life has been to me, am I getting a fair shake? Is everything just? It's like my world just keeps getting smaller and smaller and I just keep getting more and more miserable. That's what I've noticed. And so I think the problem is whenever we talk about justice is our focus. And our human focus, when we talk about justice, tends to be different than God's focus whenever he talks about justice in the Bible. And so in Micah chapter 6, God isn't just concerned with why do some people have so much, like the Joan Ginthers of the world. Why do some people have so much? What God is concerned about, what his focus is with justice is why, when some people have so much, are there others who still have so little? That's what God is concerned with. That's what he thinks about when he thinks about justice. And so I just want to take a moment and go ahead, if you will. But let's look at that word justice together. In Micah 6, verse 8, when it says do justice or act justly, the word there is the Hebrew word mishpat. Let me hear you say mishpat. Mishpat. Good job. You guys are awake this morning. That's awesome. Mishpat is actually a word that you find all throughout the Old Testament, in the Hebrew language. And then you find the concept of justice also in the New Testament. It's just everywhere in the Bible. And here's what's interesting. Almost always, whenever you see the word mishpat, the word for justice, it's almost always connected to these four vulnerable classes of people. Almost always, it's in reference to justice, mishpat, and these four classes of people: widows, orphans, the foreigner among you, and the poor. Almost always, it's whenever it appears, it's in connection with those four vulnerable classes of people: widows, orphans, the foreigner among you, and the poor. In fact, there are around 2,000 verses in the Bible about poverty and justice. 2,000 verses speaking about poverty in relation to mishpat or justice. And in fact, mishpat, actually, the reason it's translated as do justice or act justly is because it's an action-oriented word. It's justice in action. It's not some abstract idea of fairness, whether things are being fair or equal or whatever. It's about how we treat others, particularly the vulnerable. It's relational, it's covenantal, and it's active. It implies doing justice, not merely talking about it or believing in the idea, but actually taking your life and living it out and doing justice. That's what the word mishpat actually means. So all I want to do here in the next couple of minutes, I want to take a minute and I want to ask a couple of questions, maybe answer a couple of questions that I think we think about and that come up almost all the time whenever we talk about the word justice and we talk about what does it mean to do justice. These are a couple of questions that we have. And so the first one is oftentimes we ask the question, why does God require this of us? Why would God require us to be people who do justice, who actually lean into that? And the simplest way to answer that question, I think Dave just did a great job, talking about it a moment ago, is because when you look at the scriptures describe God as being just. God is a God who is just. In fact, God is angry oftentimes in the scriptures about injustice. Oftentimes the places in the Bible where you see God expressing anger, it's about, he's angry about injustice. He's angry about human sin and the way it's affecting people. And oftentimes we don't like that, right? Many times people get very hung up on that. It's kind of like we don't like an angry God. We don't like a God who's angry at injustice or angry at human sin. But what I would tell you is we really don't want to live in a world where God is not angry about injustice and about human sin. Oftentimes, maybe when we view God that way, maybe we haven't experienced some of the worst injustices that happen in our world. But I promise you, if you grew up in war-torn Ukraine, for instance, you would want a God who was angry about injustice. You'd want a God who was angry about rape and invasion and murder. If you grew up in extreme poverty somewhere in our world, and there's many places like that, where your basic needs of life were not met, you would want a God, and you would want to worship a God who was angry about the injustices of greed and corruption and the ways that some people benefit and get richer and richer while the poor get poorer, that would bother you. That would be something you would want. And the reason that violates something inside of us is because we're told that's how God is. God is just. I remember many years ago, I was in Haiti on a missions trip with a group of pastors. And it actually was right after the earthquake that happened in 2010. And we were in the city of Port-au-Prince that was most affected by that earthquake. And I've been on a number of trips. I've been, in different places in the world where there's some real hardships and poverty. But for me, this particular trip, that's the worst, I think, extreme poverty that I've seen up close in person in my life. And I remember because there was so many people that had been displaced by the earthquake, there were these, what they called them tent cities that just appeared everywhere. It was basically people who had no home anymore, trying to cobble things together. And they were basically living in like the mud, and there was no sewage, no running water. So they're just living in this filth. Children that are starving, people who are dying of diseases that we've already figured out how to cure in our world. It was just awful. And so I remember we had this like kind of vehicle. It's like kind of like a pickup truck where it was kind of fitted so we could all ride in the back of it. And we would ride through, just garbage everywhere, people just living this way. And it was just really hard to see. And I'll never forget, one day we're riding around this truck and we had to go slow because the roads were in such bad shape and there's so much debris. And then all of a sudden I remember we hit this like road. It was like this perfectly paved road. It was smooth, and all of a sudden the vehicle starts going faster, and it's like, where are we? And you look around and the tent cities disappear, and the slums and all the the garbage and everything just sort of disappears. And all of a sudden coming into view on our left is this beautiful compound with this gated fence, all, with razor wire on the top of it all around. And it's this perfectly manicured lawn, beautiful grass. And then as we got closer, there's this giant mansion sitting, right here on this perfect, compound. It's just so beautiful. And it was just so shocking. I remember leaning over to our one of our translators who was riding with us. And I said, "What is that? Who lives over there?" And our translator said, "Oh, that's the governor's mansion." And that contrast of seeing this poverty and then, seeing, the governor's mansion and all that, there's something about that I think whenever we see things like that in our world, it violates a sense of justice inside of us. And I think the reason for that, it should violate our sense of justice. And the reason it does is because God is like that. God sees things that way as well. But another question we ask oftentimes is not just why does God require justice of it, but if God is just, why does our world seem so unjust? Be honest, has anybody ever asked that question?
All the time.
Yeah. If God is just, if that's who he is, why do we look around at our world and everything seems so unjust? When we see children who die of cancer, or women who have been raped or abused by family members, when we see, innocent people who are, overtaken by an evil regime or whatever it is in our world, we wonder, why does God allow this? Why doesn't God act? Why doesn't he do something about all the injustice that we see in our world? And if that's something you're wondering about, something you're questioning, here's what I would offer you. The gospel tells us that God will bring justice one day. He won't allow things to be this way and that they are in our world forever. We're told that there's going to be a second coming of Christ, and when he comes, there will be a judgment, a final judgment for all of us and for this whole world, in which all the wrongs of this world will be made right. All the injustices will be brought to justice, and that God himself will be glorified in all of that. And so the problem is, if you believe that this life is all there is, if you think to yourself like this life is all there is, then really there is no such thing as injustice. There's no such thing as justice. But what we know is that Jesus, when he returns, he will make things right again. Oftentimes, we look at God and we look at our world and things, and I've talked with so many people as a pastor who they actually lose their faith, or they walk away from God and become disillusioned in their faith because of this very question, because they say, like, if God's so just, why in the world is there injustice in our lives? But if that's something you're struggling with, even if you're watching online today, whether you're in the room or online, all I would offer you is the fact that you recognize those things as being unjust means at some level that you're aware and you recognize that there is a God. That's right. Because if there is evil, there must be a God who is good and just and right, like we were just singing about a moment ago, that he's good. You can't know one without knowing the other. The idea of God is actually where we get our notion of justice. And so, this whole idea that like God is just, that's why he requires it of us. And eventually there will come a day where he will bring justice to the earth. He will right the wrongs. And so when we're called to do justice as God's people, as the church, what we're doing is exactly what Jesus taught his disciples to pray for, that your kingdom would come, your will would be done here on earth as it is in heaven. We're being a foretaste of the way things will be ultimately one day in eternity. So if we could, what I want to do is I want to look at a story in Scripture, and we're just going to talk about how do we spot injustice? How do we spot it in our world? So like kind of define it. This is what injustice is. And then what does it mean to do justice as God calls us to do? So we're going to look at a passage in 1 Kings chapter 21. And what we're looking at here in 1 Kings 21 is a story from the divided kingdom in Israel's history. So Micah, when he wrote Micah 6:8, Micah was living during this time period where in the divided kingdom of Israel. And during this time period, there was so much injustice. And one of the most unjust rulers in Israel's history rises to power during this period of time, King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. Their story in Scripture starts a few chapters before, around 1 Kings 16 is where they're kind of first introduced in the storyline, and then their story unfolds over several chapters. But they were truly some of the most evil and unjust rulers in Israel's history and didn't honor God. And so this is 1 Kings 21. Let's look at this story together and see if we can spot the injustice, okay? So it begins this way, verse 1. Now there was a man named Naboth from Jezreel who owned a vineyard in Jezreel beside the palace of King Ahab of Samaria. One day Ahab said to Naboth, "Since your vineyard is so convenient to my palace, I would like to buy it to use as a vegetable garden. I will give you a better vineyard in exchange, or if you prefer, I will pay you for it." Seems fair, right? But Naboth replied, "The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance that was passed down by my ancestors." Now hold on a second, because you have to understand this to understand what's happening here in this passage. So it seems like it's pretty fair what King Ahab is offering, right? There's this guy with a vineyard right next to the palace. He says, "Hey, I'll pay you, or I'll give you a trade for a better piece of land," or whatever it is. And basically Naboth responds, "Well, I can't sell you that because it's part of my family inheritance." So it seems like it's a fair offer, but here's what you need to understand. What Naboth is referencing there is that when God's people moved into the promised land, every family and every tribe of Israel was given some family land. And back in that day, that's the way you could pass wealth down to the next generation, is you had to own your own land and you had to be able to work it. And so it was a way to basically ensure that people didn't fall into poverty. Every family got their own inheritance of land, and that's how they raised families. That's how they passed on wealth. And that was a protection for God's people, so that they wouldn't fall into poverty and be destitute and be taken advantage of and all that kind of thing. And so in this moment, basically Naboth is saying, King Ahab, I'd love to sell you the land, but I can't. That's my family inheritance. That's the plot of land that the Lord gave us that we're not supposed to sell, that we hang on to, that God made provision for. That's what's happening here in this passage. But look at the next verse here. It says, "So Ahab went home angry and sullen because of Naboth's answer." He still wants the land. "The king went to bed with his face to the wall and refused to eat. 'What's the matter?' his wife Jezebel asked him. 'What's made you so upset that you're not eating?' 'I asked Naboth to sell me his vineyard or trade it, but he refused,' Ahab told her. 'Are you the king of Israel or not?' Jezebel demanded. 'Get up and eat something, and don't worry about it. I'll get you Naboth's vineyard.'" So we're about to move into an injustice that's going to take place. And so just to kind of talk about how do we spot it, injustice in our world happens when we let money dictate our ethics instead of God. Whenever we let money, and that's what money is the thing in this passage, but you could maybe say that also about power or position or our own comfort even sometimes. When we let those things, money, power, position, our own comfort, when we let those things dictate our ethics instead of God, that's the root of injustice. That's where injustices begin to play themselves out in our lives and in our world. Whenever we redefine what belongs to God as something that we can basically just take for ourselves, because we're in a position to, that is the beginning of injustice. So let's look here at what happens next. Verse 8, so she, Queen Jezebel, wrote letters in Ahab's name, sealed them with his seal, and sent them to the elders and other leaders of the town where Naboth lived. In her letters, she commanded, call the citizens together for a time of fasting and give Naboth a place of honor. And then seat 2 scoundrels across from him. I love that there's the word scoundrels in this text. It just means 2 people who are willing to be bribed is all that means, that word. Seat 2 scoundrels across from him who will accuse him of cursing God and the king, then take him out and stone him to death. And this horrible plot, that's exactly what happens. She sets up this whole, banquet. Naboth in the place of honor. These 2 people she's bribed come in and accuse him of this, and the people drag him out in the street, and they throw rocks at him until he's killed, and his body is left laying in the street there. And so in the same way, that we talked about just a moment ago, injustice is easy to spot whenever we allow money or power or position to dictate our ethics instead of God. In this situation, like we just said, the land was meant to be an inheritance. That was something God had provided for his people. And yet King Ahab and Queen Jezebel act like it's just real estate. It's whatever we got to do to get our hands on it. In the same way, the law was meant as a protection. So this law that Naboth is accused of violating, cursing God and the king, that was meant as a protection in Israel. Jezebel turned that law into a weapon. She basically weaponized it to use it against Naboth. And maybe the saddest part of this whole thing, and this is what oftentimes happens with injustice in our world, is the people who drag Naboth out into the street and then stone him to death and kill him. Those people probably think they're doing the right thing. They think probably that they're because they're caught up in this system and this regime, this leadership that is telling them to do this and that's leading them this way. They probably think they're being faithful. They don't see the bigger injustice that's actually happening here in this moment, and that oftentimes happens in our world. So let's go to the very last couple of verses here. The way this story wraps up, it says, when Jezebel heard the news, she said to Ahab, "You know the vineyard Naboth wouldn't sell you? Well, you can have it now. He's dead." So Ahab immediately went down to the vineyard of Naboth to claim it. So picture this in your head. I mean, literally, Naboth's body is still laying in the street. His family no longer have a dad or a husband. His kids, who were supposed to get that inheritance of that family land, are now left orphaned. And basically, immediately, King Ahab moves in and buys the land, and now it's his. So if injustice happens when we let money or power or influence dictate our ethics instead of God, we could say that, this justice happens whenever we let God dictate our ethics instead of money. Justice in our world, what does it mean to do justice? It means we allow God and what he calls good and what he calls right in the scriptures to dictate our ethics instead of money or our own comfort or power or position. Dallas Willard, who's a great Christian writer, he made this statement. He said, character, if you want to define what is your character? Character is who you are when profit and obedience point in opposite directions. Let that sink in. Your character, who you are, is who you are basically whenever profit, doing what benefits me, doing what's best for me, and obedience to God and what his word says, when those two things point in opposite directions. Those are the places in our lives and in our worlds where we have to say, God, you're Lord. You get to dictate what I call right and what I call wrong. When I think about my life, I think about who in my life has exemplified this idea of what does it mean to do justice out of a surrender and a submission to God. The person who's probably impacted me the most personally in my life and who has modeled that and exemplified that is my wife, Carrie. And so she's a nurse, and she served with different groups of people all her life, serving the poor or people who are in difficult situations. And I'll never forget just a couple of years ago, Mother's Day was coming up. And so we're at the stage of life. We have 4 sons, but they're like, late high school and moving out, and going into college and living their own lives and getting married and all that. And so I've discovered that my job on Mother's Day is basically to make sure all my boys show up. That's my job. That's what I got to do that. Every Mother's Day comes around, that's my job. And so I remember a couple of years ago, we had planned this Mother's Day party. So right after church, I'd set it all up. My boys are coming over, and we had these plans to have this Mother's Day party on Mother's Day with our kids there right after church. And so we're talking about the party, and Carrie says to me, she says, there's one other person I'd like to invite to this Mother's Day party besides our own boys. And I said, okay, great. Who do you want to invite? And she said, well, I want to invite Rich. That's not his real name, but I'll call him Rich. She said, I want to invite Rich. And Rich was this middle school boy who at the time was living in a group foster care home in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And the way that Carrie knew him was because she had been his nurse when he was living at St. John's Home here in Grand Rapids at the group foster care program that was here in Grand Rapids. She was a nurse and had been, his nurse during that period of time. But then he had been moved down to Kalamazoo. And so I said, okay, so we called the place in Kalamazoo and tried to set it all up. But unfortunately, even though we do have a foster care license, we were not able to take him. He wasn't granted access to leave and come to our house on Mother's Day to be a part of the Mother's Day party, which was a bummer. So I said to Carrie, well, unfortunately we can't. That's a bummer. I said, but don't worry, it's still going to be a great party. The boys are coming over after church. It's going to be a great time. We're going to honor you. And I'll never forget, she just said, okay, well, if Rich can't come, then I'll tell you what, don't worry about the party. After church, I'll just go to Kalamazoo and I'll just hang out with him. I'll go visit him there on Mother's Day. And actually, to be honest with you, we got into a fight about it. It was just like, are you kidding me? I said, Carrie, this whole party, your boys are coming over after church. Like, just let us spoil you. Let us do this for you. It's going to be a great time. It's Mother's Day. You can go visit Rich another day. You can go down there and hang out with him. Do it another day, but it's Mother's Day. And I'll never forget, we're having this heated argument, and she says to me, let me tell you about this kid, Rich. And she said he was living with his mom, single mom, until she basically turned their home into a drug house. And so he was taken out of her custody. And he had other family members in the area, but either they couldn't take him for whatever reason, or they didn't want to take him. And so he ends up at the group foster care home here in Grand Rapids. And then for no fault of his own, he didn't do anything wrong or bad or anything, but just because of administrative reasons, they needed to make some space. So they ship him off again down to this group home in Kalamazoo. And she says, and on Mother's Day, that kid is going to be sitting there thinking about, what did I do to deserve being locked up alone with no family on Mother's Day? And then she goes, and Rich, that kid deserves to have a mom on Mother's Day. What am I supposed to do with that? So we talked some more, and finally we ended up deciding, okay, well, if you can't bring the kid to the party, you got to bring the party to the kid. So we went as a family, and we had a Mother's Day party in a group foster care home in Kalamazoo. It was one of the weirdest things I've ever been a part of, and one of the most beautiful things I've ever been a part of. And I'm not sure who had the bigger smile on their face, my wife, Carrie, or Rich. See, this is not a have to. Doing justice, it's a get to. When we focus on justice and we focus on ourselves, our world just keeps getting smaller and smaller. Is life fair to me? Am I being treated with justice? And we just get more and more miserable. But when we say, no, everything I have is a gift, it's been given me by God, and we realize that we have everything we could ever need by his great provision. And when we turn and we say, I want to do justice, I want to bring the kingdom of heaven, it's like our world just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and joy explodes into our lives. We define poverty oftentimes in terms of not having money. That's how oftentimes whenever you hear the word poverty, you think, well, it's people who don't have money. But a better definition of poverty is lacking access to the things that we need. That's a better understanding of poverty. So therefore, yes, there can be a poverty, there's lack of access to funds, but there also going to be a poverty of the heart, loneliness, lack of access to other people in relationship. That really was the situation for Rich, this kid in the foster care system. There can be a poverty of the body, lack of access to health care. There are people dying of diseases in our world that we've already figured out how to cure, but they just don't have access to it. That poverty of the heart, that loneliness, you can have $1 million and still have the poverty of the heart. There's a poverty of the mind, which is lack of access to education. There's so many people in our world that's their situation. And then there can also be a poverty of the voice, which is lack of advocacy. That's really what happened to Naboth in the story we were just reading. There was nobody to advocate, nobody to speak up on his behalf when these false charges came. And our world is full of these kinds of injustices. And so what does it mean to do justice? As children of God, as his church, as his people, what it means is to show up for the people in our world who lack access. And God is with us when we are with them. It's not a have to, it's a get to. And so a couple of questions here to just ask ourselves as we close. First of all, where are you tempted to let money or comfort or power or position or whatever it is? Where are you tempted to let money or comfort dictate your ethics? Is there any place where you're tempted to just say, I'm going to go along with what the world offers rather than letting God dictate what's right and wrong for you? And then secondly, who do you know that lacks access that you could provide? Who in your world is one of those people? Maybe it's a poverty of the heart. Maybe it's poverty of the voice. Who do you know that lacks access that God might call you to? You can leave those up there, those questions, for a second. I asked Kyle, there's something I'll tell you about this church I'm really proud of. I think you guys, the Story Church, and you maybe you don't know about this, but I think here in the Comstock Park area, the Story is really doing some great things to care about justice and to really involve and engage our community with justice. So I asked Kyle to share with me a couple of things I know that are going on. I wanted to reference them here, and there's opportunities for you to get involved in each of these. But there's something that's kind of newer. It's called Closet of Hope. How many of you have heard of Closet of Hope that's happening here at the Story? Okay, just like a few hands, few people. So actually, this is basically there's this Closet of Hope, and what's happening is we're collecting things like prom dresses and shoes for kids in the foster care system. I don't know if you know this, but Pastor Kyle and Courtney, they adopted their children out of the foster care system. And so that's a definite heartbeat for them. And so oftentimes kids come in to foster care like with just kind of like a trash bag full of clothes oftentimes. And so when you can offer them things that's their own, and they get things that are their own, it like restores dignity. They get to be seen and they get to be known. And so there's a wonderful ministry that's doing that here. We have a couple different food outreach programs through the food pantry that's here, as well as Hand to Hand. And yes, since Erica's here, he's doing a great job leading that. And so we partner with people in food insecurity while seeing them as people, not a number, not a problem to solve, not an issue to resolve, but as people. Again, restoring dignity, creating relationships, and sharing the hope of Jesus with them. One of our newer partners is called Why Not, and they're a global missions partner. You may have heard of them a little bit, but many of their mission focus centers around identifying needs and then supporting them as they heal, grow, and help people learn to walk through the injustice of poverty or of food scarcity or of the injustice of addictions. And these are ways as the church we can get involved in these things. And then World Vision, a bunch of you ran this past fall, right, for World Vision. That's another way that we partner together with others to bring not just water to areas that don't have any water, but to bring living water, the hope of the gospel, to people who don't have access to that in their world. So some of these things are individual. How is God calling me to step into situations where people lack access? But then as a church, too, there are opportunities to get involved and be the hands and feet of Jesus. And I want to encourage you, if God's tapping you on the shoulder, step in. Step in. Let God change your heart. And when we step in and we do justice, God's with us. and he moves in our lives in ways that really we can't experience on our own because we are joining him in his mission in this world. So will you bow in prayer with me? Jesus, right now, we do just acknowledge, God, that this is a heart posture thing. I pray to God that you would just change our hearts, Lord. I know I've needed that. Even in this series, God, would you just help us not to be focused so much, God, on how we're being treated, whether we're getting a fair shake, justice. We know, Jesus, when we put our faith and our hope in you, there's a day coming where every wrong will be made right, where every injustice will be made right again, where all the bad things and all the evil things in our world will simply come untrue because of the resurrection and because of you conquering death and the grave. And so, but Jesus, we live in this world right now. And so will you show each of us, God, how are you calling us to do justice? How are you calling us to show up for those in our world who lack access as a church and also as individuals, that your kingdom would come and that your will would be done here on earth, just as the same as it is in heaven right now and will be for all of eternity. We ask this in Jesus' name. Everybody said, amen.
We hope this message encourages you in seeing who God is and who you are in him. If you want to take the next step, visit thestorygr.com/new. We look forward to connecting with you there, and we'll see you back here next week.